Hi, welcome to Raaonline. I'm Dr. Alice, Associate Professor in Microbiology. In this lecture, we'll be learning about immune response. At the end of the lecture, you'll be understanding the different aspects of antibody-mediated immune response and cell-mediated immune response, the antigen presentation mechanism, the various antigen processing mechanisms, and how the T helper cells, the cytotoxic T cells and the B cells gets activated and differentiated, and also the various events of humoral immune response and cell-mediated immune response. So, to introduce this immune response, it is the coordinated reaction of the various cells of the immune system. So, it has two arms. One is the humoral or antibody-mediated immune response. The second one is the cell-mediated immune response. So now this antibody-mediated immune response, or AMI, it secretes antibodies to protect the host. And it helps to neutralize microbial antigens which are present freely or which are present in the host cells and also present in the extracellular spaces. But these antibodies cannot neutralize the intracellular antigens. So now these intracellular antigens and the tumor cells are encountered by cell-mediated immune response. So the main cell that participates in the cell-mediated immune response is the cytotoxic T cells. And other non-specific cells also participate in the cell-mediated immune response. These include the natural killer cells, the macrophages, and other granulocytes like neutrophils and eosinophils. So now when we talk about this antibody-mediated immune response and cell-mediated immune response, they are interdependent. So how they are interdependent? Antibody-mediated immune response is helped by a cell-mediated immune response by the cytokines secreted by the helper T cells, which in turn will stimulate the B cells. And now the cell-mediated immune response is helped by an antibody-mediated immune response by the antibodies. Okay, so these antibodies helps the effector cells, especially the natural killer cells, to recognize the target cells. So target cells are those cells which harbor the intracellular antigens. And now there are some events which is common to both antibody-mediated immune response and cell-mediated immune response. So the first one is antigen presentation to the helper T cells. The second one is the activation and differentiation of helper T cells into two subsets, that is helper T cell 1 and helper T cell 2. So helper T cell 1 index the cell-mediated immune response, whereas the helper T cell 2 will index the antibody-mediated immune response. So now let's look into the antigen presentation. So now for the immune response to get inducted, the antigens has to be presented to the helper T cells. So like B cells, helper T cells or the cytotoxic T cells cannot recognize antigens directly. That is, the antigens present in the free state directly. But these antigens has to be processed and has to be presented onto a self molecule. The self molecules are present on the host cells. They are called the MHC molecules. So there are two molecules which participate in the immune response. One is MHC class 1, the other one is the MHC class 2. So now the extracellular antigens are usually processed by the antigen presenting cells. So these antigen presenting cells, they engulf the antigen, they endocytose it, and then they process it, and they break down the antigen into antigenic peptides of containing specific epitopes onto these self molecules, that is MHC class 1 or class 2 molecule. So now there are some APCs, you call them as the professional APCs. which include the dendritic cells, the macrophages and the B cells. So they harbor MHC class II molecule. So when the antigen is processed and the antigenic peptide is presented along with class II molecule, then helper T cell can recognize it, and they in turn can activate a B cell or a cytotoxic T cell. Now, there are some APCs, you term that as non-professional APCs, which include the fibroblast, thymic epithelial cells, vascular endothelial cells, glial cells, thyroid epithelial cells, etc. And now, what are these target cells? So now, these target cells harbor the intracellular antigens. Okay, so they can harbor viruses, or even the tumor cells are termed as the target cells. And these target cells, they have MHC class I molecule, and the viral particles or the tumor antigens will be processed and it will be presented along with class I MHC molecule, which in turn will be recognized by a cytotoxic T cell, right? And now, this antigen presentation happens in two pathways. What do you call it as? The antigen processing pathways. So, one is the cytosolic pathway, the other one is the endocytic pathway. So, now the cytosolic pathway mainly encounters the intracellular antigens. They process it, and the antigenic peptides will be presented along with class I MHC molecule, which in turn recognized by a cytotoxic T cell. And now the second one is the endocytic pathway. So here the extracellular antigens will be engulfed by the antigen presenting cell, broken down into antigenic peptides containing specific epitopes, and will be presented along with class II MHC molecule, which in turn recognized by a helper T cell. So these are the two antigenic processing pathways that happens in the immune response.